Hey y'all, Dr. Leslie here, and welcome back to Mindset Mastery, the podcast where we dive deep into the emotional, psychological, and spiritual truths behind the stories that shape our world. I'm your host, Dr. Leslie. I'm a licensed professional counselor, a mindset coach, an educator, and I am the CEO of Morel Community Counseling Services. On today's episode, it's going to be a little bit different, guys, okay? Not the normal mindset mastery. We're going to unpack the disturbing and deeply human layers of Sean Diddy Combs' case. And not from just a legal or gossip driven lens, but through a mental health and trauma informed perspectives. So, I want you to grab some popcorn. I want you to grab a pen and a paper, and I want you to join us on this episode titled Behind the Headlines: Diddy, Domestic Violence, and the Deep Psychology of Power, Pain, and Self-Love. Let's get into it. So, again, this episode is not about judging one man. It's about understanding the systematic patterns of abuse, the psychology of addiction and power, and what happens when self love is replaced by ego, control, and fear. So, if you are ready to go underneath the surface and confront some of these uncomfortable but necessary truths, stay with me and let's talk. And before we get into it all, I just want to provide a disclaimer. Some of these topics are hard to talk about. Some of them can be very triggering to individuals who have experienced severe trauma, domestic violence, drug addiction, abuse of any kind, and completely understood if this is not something that you want to indulge or be a part of, but I just kind of want to provide a landscape for individuals who are asking certain questions and are looking for certain answers. And I just want to provide a little bit more of a mental health analysis, a mental health perspective to, what we are experiencing and what we are vicariously being traumatized around. So, the psychology of domestic violence: power, control, and pain. Let's talk about the most visible and horrifying aspects of this case, and that is domestic violence. That leaked video footage, paired with survivor accounts, depicts more than just a physical altercation between Diddy and Cassie. It wasn't even a physical altercation, it was him abusing her. It reveals a pattern, a calculated, repeated cycle of abuse. And if you study trauma and relationship dynamics like I have, you start to recognize the markers. What I saw on that video was a cycle of abuse in full form. So when you break down the cycle of abuse, it starts with a tension that builds, where anger, blame, and fear starts to rise up. Then it goes into the actual incident, a violent outburst, physical or emotional. The next step is reconciliation. That includes apologies, gifts, promises. And then the final stage is the calm, the honeymoon phase. And guess what? Because it's a cycle of abuse, it starts all over again. So, most people I talk to on a regular basis are often saying, why didn't Cassie just leave? We are completely missing the point when we ask that question. Why? Because survivors often experience something called trauma bonding. That is a psychological response where abuse and affections become intertwined. The abuser isn't just a threat, they're also at times the only source of comfort. And that contradiction, oh man, it's incredibly hard to untangle, especially when shame, fear, and dependency and manipulation are all mixed in. So, Cassie, being a very young person in retrospect to her older, more seasoned partner, it's hard to break down or untangle what was created. It probably is that component of she was afraid of him. She had a lot of shame associated with what she was going through and what she was engaging in. And there's also a dependency factor where, she was trying to get into the music business and she was willing to, allow this person to be, I guess, more of a caregiver, a sponsor. And she was dependent on him to take care of what her needs were, to pay for her lifestyle. And we put manipulation into that mix. It is a tangled web, Okay. So that's something to keep in mind, right? The next component is drug addiction. Oh my goodness. We gotta unpack drug addiction, coping, controlling, and weaponization. Let's talk about this substance abuse, right? Because we have a variety of layers here, and this is just something else that we need to unpack. So there are allegations surrounding Diddy also highlighting his drug use, and not just personal, but in some cases allegedly using drugs to manipulate or disempower others. We've heard about the NDAs, but we heard about people taking a pink substance, and we heard allegedly that people were, taking a cocktail of drugs at the Diddy parties. But let me be clear. Addiction is often rooted in unresolved trauma. It becomes a form of escape from emotions that feel unbearable, such as pain, guilt, emptiness, and shame. People learn, especially in high pressure environments like fame and wealth, to numb rather than feel. But in abusive dynamics, we see something even more dangerous. Drugs used to control, to silence, and to isolate. This isn't just partying. It's like psychological warfare disguised as a good time. I'm going to repeat that. This isn't just partying, folks. It's psychological warfare designed as a good time. Also, we got to keep in mind that when this drug high fades away, these individuals are often left with deeper wounds and fewer tools to cope with what just happened or what has been happening or the unresolved traumas that they never processed. Now, another very important component that we have to psychoanalyze in the Diddy case is power, ego, and the fragile mask of control. Oh, we got to dig deep, people. We got to dig deeper into the power and the ego-driven dynamic that presents here. So, when you grow up without emotional stability, whether that's from abandonment, trauma, or cultural conditioning, you may come to believe that control equals safety. Like when you can control something, you feel safer. Most patients that I work with who struggle with anxiety disorder often feel like they have to control their environment because it makes them safe. You often hear people who are very anxious or people who are very controlling say things like, let me do it. Because if I do it, what happens when I do it? It gets done right, or I feel better. So oftentimes it's about control because that control helps them manage their own safety. In celebrity culture, control becomes currency. When control becomes currency, you're surrounded by people who say yes. You're isolated from criticism. And inside of that bubble, it inflates the ego while starving your actual soul. So in this case, Diddy, who has a long history, multiple decades of fame, multiple decades of success and power, surrounded by people who often say yes to him, going all the way back to the televised Making the Band, where you saw how his level of control, what happens when people weren't saying yes or doing it his way. The level of emotional instability and emotional dysregulation that we saw televised. I guess we assumed that it was just for TV. But come to find out, that's a part of old boy's personality. People say yes. He got a bunch of yes people around him. He's isolated from criticism. People are afraid to criticize and redirect. And inside of that bubble, what's happening? His ego is growing, 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 growing. So what we see in many public downfalls, such as R. Kelly to Diddy and countless unnamed abusers. I mean, we got new cases coming out every day. Bill Cosby, the alleged case with Smokey Robinson. It's just so much. Clive Davis, Hugh Hefner. I mean, I could be here and I would, kind of get lost in names. But let's get back to what we're talking about. So basically, in these names and these countless abusers, there is a narcissistic defense mechanism. And the ideology is, if I can dominate the room, the narrative, the people, I won't have to face my own wounds. If I can control my environment, nobody's going to be looking at me or looking into me. They cannot see me. I'm invisible because I am the puppet master. Nobody can play me because I'm playing everybody. So that's the narcissistic defense mechanism. But the truth always surfaces. And often those with the most power are the most disconnected from others and from themselves. So you got all of this power, but at the end of the day, you feel lost. And that's why, it's important for them to be surrounded by yes people, to isolate themselves from criticism and critique and failure to take accountability, because that is what continues to feed the ego and that continues to give them the essence of the power, because nobody is backing down. So I said it was going to be multiple layers that I wanted to unpack, but the most important one that really stands out to me is the lack of self-love. That lack of self-love is a big deal, people. That is the root of destructive behavior of any kind. When you don't feel worthy, when you don't feel like you're enough, and you don't feel valuable, that is literally the actual beginning of the end. Now, I'm not saying that people can't walk that back. I work with people every day on certain strategies and techniques to improve self-worth and to improve, their value system and their level of confidence. But I think that's one thing that is really missing, when we think about people and abuse and the cycle of abuse and narcissistic personality disorder and all of the low-hanging fruit. But this self-love, now we got to go to the core, right? Because that's you. It's called self-love. That's you having love for yourself. At the center of violence, addiction, ego, and manipulation is also a deep absence of self-love. And I'm not talking about that spa day self-love. I'm talking about the real thing. The kind of self-love that says, listen, even when I'm not performing, I am enough. When I was formed in my mother's womb, I was enough. Before I wake up out my bed and wipe the crud out of my eye, I am enough. When you don't believe that, when you internalize messages that you're only valuable if you produce, seduce, intimidate, or succeed, you will spend your life chasing external validation. Of course, it's going to lead to chaos. It's going to lead to pain. It's going to lead to hurting other people to avoid feeling your own hurt. It's the wounded inner child running the show constantly. The wounded inner child has taken control of the wheel and they are driving. And until you confront that pain, until you reparent yourself, you continue to bleed on people who never cut you. That's what I think is really happening. We got Puffy who calls it self-love, which is very characteristic of someone with narcissistic personality disorder. Almost, projecting out the Genesis effect, projecting out what they want, but that's not who they are at the core, right? So anybody who struggles with self-love, when you love yourself, it's just certain things you don't do. right? And of course, Cassie, as the victim in this case, it was very obvious that the component of self-love was missing here. And, some of the things that she was willing to do to gain the attention of a man who was abusing her, of a man who may have in the beginning was very charismatic and loving and supportive to her until he studied her enough and figured out her weaknesses and figured out that self-love was probably not on the agenda. And he was able to worm his way in and treat her a certain way. Now, listen, by no means on the Mindset Mastery podcast are we condoning violence, abuse of any kind. But understand that everybody who smiles is not your friend. And everyone who smells good is not going to be a good time. So you got to keep in mind that people are studying too. And that's why it's important that you are tapped into who you are and what you are and where you come from and how you do it and all of that, right? And just because people don't recognize a diamond, it doesn't make it less valuable. But you got to know that for yourself. And I feel like that's where Cassie kind of something went wrong, where the price of fame was something that she really wanted. And I don't think she knew she was signing up for this mess, right? But that's just something that we got to also keep in mind. Another thing that I want to unpack here is very important. A lot of people ain't going to speak on it, but I think it's very important. I would love to speak on this. We got to unpack how people out here selling their souls. The price of fame, fortune, and emotional bankruptcy. Now, honestly, I know I hit you with a whole lot. It's only been 20 minutes, but we got to talk about something that rarely gets addressed in the mental health conversation, but is absolutely relevant here. What happens to people when they sell their souls for fame, money, and power? I don't mean that literally, but energetically, spiritually, emotionally, there is a cost when you trade authenticity for attention, integrity for influence, and peace for popularity. In the entertainment industry, and honestly in many other industries, there is this unspoken contract. Be who we need you to be. Do what's asked of you, even if it violates your values, your integrity, your self-worth. Keep quiet when you're uncomfortable. And in exchange, we will give you money, power, access, status, whatever you want. It sounds glorious to a person who's not tapped in, who feels like they need the outside agenda or they need all of these things to validate who they are. Until you realize that you no longer recognize yourself in the mirror. You walk past the mirror and you like, I don't even know who that is, because you have done so many things, and not just things with your body, but so many things you've overlooked, so much integrity that you've given up, so many abandonments of your own true self. You have betrayed yourself. So again, until you realize that the applause doesn't come and it doesn't fill the emptiness, like all of that external or the people often, young girls, often young people, often say, I'd rather cry in a Bentley than in a Pinto. Well, basically what they're saying is they would rather take whatever the trauma or the abuse is and be a kept person or to, have certain luxuries in life than to be in a Pinto. Well, listen, you heard it first here, Dr. Leslie. I'd rather laugh in a Pinto than get my ribs broken in a Bentley on everything. Okay? Because when people understand that you don't have a price, people understand that you're priceless, you cannot be bought. It's a certain level of games that won't be played. It's a certain level of, treatment that won't take place. Now, I'm not saying that people are exempt and it couldn't happen to anybody. It can happen to the best of us. So nobody is here finger pointing and saying that, victims should, not be victims. A victim is a victim is a victim for whatever reason. And it is our job to dig deep to figure out how that person doesn't continue to get victimized. So keeping that in mind, the likes, just because, on social media, people are liking you, the likes don't mean love. The power that you gain if it's going to cost you your peace, it's going to cost you your privacy, even your personhood, and in some cases, your life, you got to ask yourself, is that worth it? And what's worse, sometimes people are brought at very young ages. They are bought at very young ages when they're still very vulnerable. Cassie was very vulnerable in that 19-year-old meeting, almost 40-year-old. She was eager to be seen. She was hungry for love, trying to escape whatever her previous life was. I don't know if she had a previous history of trauma. And guess what? The machine, the manipulator, the narcissist, the abuser, the individual who is studying, he knew that. Predators know that. Manipulators know that. And once they're in, the longer you stay silent, the harder it is to get out without shattering the illusion that you and everyone else that you know and what everybody has built is fake, right? So like you're in it and you work so hard to get in it, and now you're here and you have grown accustomed to a certain lifestyle, and you don't want to go back and tell everybody, oh no, this is a legit, clinically insane individual. You don't want to say that, right? Because then you don't know, like, I don't know who your village is or who is in your corner, but some people got people in their corner that are not supposed to be there. People are encouraging them to, take the abuse. Going back to that whole Bentley conversation. No, Savannah, you got yourself a good man, girl. That mess. And that's exactly what it is. It's mess. Because sometimes that statement could ring true, but then it's times when that statement does not ring true. You got yourself a good man and you got a $20,000 Birkin, but you got every rib in your body is broke. It don't make sense to me. It really doesn't. And so that really comes down to the self-love conversation. And most people will raise their hand and they would sell their self-love and their self-worth for $1. And this is how the predator, the manipulator, and the machine takes advantage. So guess what? The truth is, when you sell your soul doesn't forget. Even if you get the mansion, the followers, the headlines, the big record deal, Cassie's soul knows that she betrayed herself. It knows the guilt, the anxiety, the shame, the need to constantly be good, to perform, to have the control. That's your soul trying to say, listen, come on, we gotta get some order here. And I think that's probably what gave her the courage to come out and start speaking up. Like, yo, this guy's got to stop. And it took this long for her to, work through the shame and the pain of it all. And hopefully that sister is getting her some therapy and some support. If not, reach out to me. I'm Dr. Leslie. And you can find me on Instagram, dr.les_MCCS. Or for anyone for that matter, under the sound of my voice, who feels like they need support for things that are similar in their life that they may have experienced, or this case is giving them some vicarious trauma. So some people try to drown the voices of like this hurt, this pain, this trauma. They drown it in drugs, sex, power, and other distractions. But guess what? Your soul never forgets, and you can't keep silent forever. So what now? You're probably asking. Healing, accountability, and conscious culture. So what can we do? What can you do? I know you're probably like, so I'm just, a little person in this big pond of people. Like, what can I do? If you're a survivor of abuse, please know your story is valid. You didn't cause the harm. You didn't deserve it. And you can reclaim your voice. Therapy, support groups, safety planning. There are paths forward for you. If you are a person who have harmed others, healing is also possible, but only through accountability. That means owning your own actions, doing the work, seeking professional help, repairing relationships if it's safe and welcome, And for those of us who are just watching all of this unfold, we have a role too. Stop glorifying toxic masculinity. Teach your sons emotional regulation. Teach your daughters boundaries. Call out abuse, even when it's hidden behind the fame or success. Because this trial is not just about Diddy, it's a mirror for us all. What does it reflect back to you? So I just want to thank you for your time. And I wanted to unpack, some of the common trends that we're seeing here so far in this trial. And I would like to continue to explore. Join us, Mindset Mastery, as we continue to unpack and psychoanalyze this, one of the largest trials, that we have seen so far. So before I let you leave, I just want to share that you are not your trauma, but your transformation is your responsibility. So you are not what happened to you, but you are responsible for your way forward. Let's stop confusing power with peace. Let's stop normalizing pain as passion. And let's stop waiting until someone is publicly exposed to start talking about what's been broken in private for way too long. I mean, the stories, the NDAs are expiring, folks. If this episode resonated with you in any kind of way, share it with someone who needs to hear it, with someone in denial, with someone in pain. And if you're ready to do your own healing work, stick around, subscribe to my channel, find me on my community, on Instagram, on Facebook. I'm Dr.Les, L-E-S _MCCS, wanting you to know that you are not alone on this journey. Until the next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Peace.